Hello and welcome to Distilling Greatness. I'm Jeff Arnett, Master Distiller at Company Distilling. I'm going to be your host today, and I have been joined by what would be described certainly as a pioneer in the spirits industry, Miss Marianne Eaves. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Jeff. It's my pleasure to be here.
For many people who follow our podcast, I know if you're following other bourbon brands and stuff like that, she will be no stranger to you. Marianne's had she's younger than me, which irritates me. But had a really interesting career so far. But let me just give you a quick bio on her. She was Kentucky's first female master distiller since Prohibition, chemical engineering degree, and has certainly a creative flair and has revolutionized bourbon making in her own way. She's behind the acclaimed creations Sweeten's Cove and also her own brand Forbidden Bourbon, and has received recognition as one of America's top 40 under 40 tastemakers. Today, Marianne's going to share insights on blending tradition with innovation, leading change in this historic industry. Marianne, it's so wonderful to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
So let's dive right in. I've got some questions here for you. I think you've had a chance to kind of review those. But you said you were born in Chattanooga, but you were raised in Kentucky. And we certainly know what Kentucky's known for, but what role did growing up in Kentucky play in your decision to enter the bourbon industry, and how has your upbringing influenced your whiskey making approach?
I love this question because while I was born in Tennessee and raised in Kentucky, I grew up in a dry county. So I didn't see much alcohol growing up. I wasn't steeped in the bourbon tradition like a lot of folks around Kentucky say that they were. Yep. So we had a bottle of Jim Beam on my bar. I remember growing up that was barely touched. The dust on the shoulder just grew and grew every year. Yep. But eventually, I had to decide what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I decided to go down a technical path. Got a chemical engineering degree at University of Louisville. And that's where, in my internship at Brown-Forman, that's where I learned how to drink, really, especially bourbon.
Yeah. So that for people who don't know it, that we have some common roots there. So I had worked about 10 years at Procter & Gamble in food and beverage. I had a little bit of working knowledge of what a distillation column was. We actually used it to stop frying oil from going rancid at Pringles.
Oh,
so if you pass frying oil through it, the steam would actually take the fatty acids off of it. It would extend the life of the frying oil, so your bleed rate on your processors was lower. So I had seen one in action before. I just never made beverage alcohol with it before, which was kind of cool. But Marianne and I also were co-conspirators at Jack Daniel's back in the day when I was still fairly recent as the master distiller. Marianne was in R&D. We were tasked with creating one of the new grain bills at Jack Daniel's, which was JD Malt, which I thought, I tell people to this day, they twisted my arm to make me do that. I'm not a big fan of American malts in general. And it certainly had an interesting outcome. Things I'd never seen before happening at Jack Daniel's, the foaming.
Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah.
It was really exciting to me because just having the opportunity to experiment on that scale. Yeah. And I think that was one of the
different
things.
yeast cultures. Yeah. We tried a little bit of everything there.
Yeah. Having made, up to that point, just the same recipe for 100,000 years at Jack Daniel's, and to have get the team on board and, make sure that, that everything, the mill settings were correct and we weren't going to jam up the still, which may or may not have happened.
I might have puked a little bit over to the double. But hey, but yeah, I can remember the technical write-up summary that Marianne did, and it was such a great descriptor for it. Is there's sometimes when something foams, it may be light and fluffy, but I think it was described as big, mean, angry foam. Yeah. That the malt created. It could climb 10 feet out of a fermenter, out the top, and into the creek if we didn't stop it. 100%. It was interesting, but. Anyway, so how did your degree in chemical engineering shape your understanding and methodologies you've used in distilling? Are there particular aspects of your education that you find most applicable to what you do today on a daily basis?
It's interesting when people find out that I'm a chemical engineer, they're like, whoa, isn't that kind of overkill? I'm like, well, actually, people don't really realize, and I think it's because of shows like Moonshiners, that it is very scientific and technical what it takes to make a really nice, high quality spirit. So when I was going through the curriculum to become a chemical engineer, I found when I got into my internship that you use every major unit operation that you learn in school in a distillery application. So I fell in love with it first just because I'm a huge nerd. And I was like, wait, filtration, distillation, heat exchange, all these things.
Yeah.
And then getting into a real distillery setting and making real products, I realized quickly that making the most highly efficient process does not equate to the best tasting product.
Yeah.
So it took some time working with you, working with Chris, working with other folks, other, senior engineers, Joe and Steve there in R&D to figure out what those trade-offs are in yield, in efficiency, to make sure that the flavor is exactly what you want.
Yeah. So, of course, my background was in engineering as well. And clearly, if you're going to be in engineering, chemical is the best for this industry. I wasn't. My background, I'd worked in coffee. I learned sensory sciences from the coffee masters, learned how to class and grade coffee beans. So learning that side of it had been pretty helpful, because then you start to learn the other parts of the process. But I've often described distilling, and one of the things I think that makes it so fascinating is that the science of fermentation and distillation, well documented for many years. You're bound by certain laws of nature that are going to prevail no matter what you do. But I don't think you can read a textbook and think that you're going to come straight out of the gate making a great product, because how you apply that science, there's a lot of art behind how you work with the science to get what you want. And like you said, sometimes the things you think are going to optimize don't get you what you want. And you won't know it until you try. So there's a little bit of trial and error going on. But, I think over time you begin to learn, I've tried that before, I don't do that again. So you start narrowing in the consideration set of what you think you're going to be doing on the next round. So, with time, understanding the science, clearly important, but also I think it's the time in the art of it that ultimately makes you better and better.
100%. Yeah. Sure. I agree with that trial and error. So, coming up in the industry, brand new at Brown-Forman, I would often, just kind of run my idea past the engineers there before we started down the road of a new project. And there were lots of times they would say, "Oh no, we tried this 30 years ago. It won't work. Let's look into something else." Right. And that was, kind of exciting to me when I moved on from Brown-Forman and started at the former Old Taylor Distillery and had my own laboratory and my, was sourcing my own grains, that I got to ask some of those questions again that I personally hadn't answered, and I got a new answer. I was like, all right, we're going to try some interesting things, because, initially when I started up the stills at Castle and Key, it was a very similar process to what I had been exposed to at Brown-Forman and Old Forester and Jack Daniels. And then, it evolved over time.
Yeah. So throughout your career in the bourbon industry, you probably had some mentors along the way that helped kind of shape, who you are today. Could you share with us who at least one of those mentors was, who you felt like personified greatness in your eyes, and how did their guidance help shape you and the path that you're on now?
It's interesting. I had lots of mentors in different aspects of what it means to be a good technical distiller. Mm-hmm. But I think I wouldn't be where I am today without the guidance of Nancy Warfield. Okay. You remember Nancy?
I do remember Nancy. Yeah.
So I think that having her mentorship and her confidence kind of wore off on me. I'm a natural introvert. Getting into,
Really? Come on now. I don't get that sense.
I am. I'm a trained extrovert. I had professional training with Brown-Forman to get, to put me in front of the media. You went through it. Yeah. But she really kind of encouraged me to get out of my shell, to meet people, because being part of a big corporate environment is so much about being seen and networking. And so I had to really understand that part of the business to get the opportunities to do some of the interesting experiments that I got to work on, to stretch into other parts of the business. I don't know that the opportunity to become a brand ambassador and the master taster would have come for me had I not been willing to step into uncomfortable situations. Yeah. So.
I think for people who know the Brown-Forman, brand set and the personalities and faces and voices that are there are so many people behind the scenes that really kind of, I think, create the strength of Brown-Forman over time. There were many people in Lynchburg who didn't, who weren't known to the public, who were critical players and super skilled. I can remember, spending time with Wes Hazel and John Keck and others who had these, 40-year careers, Steve Hughes, and just gleaning so much from their knowledge and stuff like that you just felt like, I think they helped save you from harebrained ideas at times. But just, they were so solid in the science, had done, they're methodical in their research and everything, but reading the papers and things that they were able to ascertain, the study of charcoal mellowing, what does it actually do? It's not as mystical, it's actually got some pretty known science behind it that can be measurable over time. And I always thought it was very interesting because that's not my background, but it certainly made me smarter at what I understood its abilities and limitations to be when you apply it to a process. So you are Kentucky's first female master distiller since Prohibition. What challenges did you face? I mean, this is obviously, it has been a male dominated industry. That is changing. If you look at Tennessee, that is changing very quickly here. President of the guild is Alex, because she's moving on to Kentucky. She hasn't announced what she's going to do, but she's been at Old Dominic for a while. Came out of Wild Turkey. So, but we have some really talented females in Tennessee as well. But what challenges did you personally face as being named that, and just, I think, getting your rightful place, respect that you deserved?
Yeah, I think that being the first, there's bound to be folks that are gonna doubt and question, and I just had to make the choice. I saw it as an opportunity, moving from Brown Foreman to the former Old Taylor Distillery, to take my career in my own hands and do something like getting into the trenches again, and really like working with the pipe fitters and the plumbers and the electricians, and building something from scratch that I could call my own. It's starting to build my own legacy there. So when Fred Minnick actually brought to my attention that I was going to be Kentucky's first ever female master distiller, probably, he said since Prohibition, because in his research, he was going through old production logs, and he's like,
you don't
it's
always
an initial
know.
and a last name, and there
don't
would
always
be
know.
no way to know.
Yeah.
It really, and he's really the one that announced me as Kentucky's first female master distiller. And then I just had to make the decision to kind of straighten up and embody the role. I felt like saying, oh, no, he is mistaken, would have been a misstep for me, and what I was, the challenge that I was taking on, and reviving a historic bourbon icon. But then also, like, what message does that send to the next generation of women who were quickly coming up behind me,
Yeah, I have taken most of the Bourbon Trail, but Old Taylor had not reopened yet. I would love to see it. I've seen it in photographs. A beautiful facility.
It is stunning.
So absolutely, I know you had a great time there. Just the experiences of it. People have often asked me, what happened at Jack Daniel's? Why have you moved on and everything? And I said, nothing really happened. It's just you get to that point where it's like, if all I ever do is work for Jack Daniel's and I retire from here, I work another 10 or 15 years, I'm not going to be satisfied from a career standpoint, or I want to try to do something different? Would I like the freedom that comes from entrepreneurship and ownership to create my own distillery, my own brand? And I finally got to that point where I'm like, I know if I don't take the opportunity, that I'm going to have some regret. So that's really all I needed to know. It wasn't anything wrong. Everyone had been excellent, just treated me very well there. People of Lynchburg, very supportive of me in my time there. I'm always going to be grateful for that. But I just knew myself well enough to know that some of these times you just have to believe in yourself enough to take the chance. So I'm with you on that. I'm glad you followed your heart.
Well, thank you
on that as well.
Yeah.
So you have been able to create, you're behind Sweetens Cove. You've got your own brand, Forbidden Bourbon. What kind of creative process do you typically follow as you think through what you want to do with a particular brand? No, whiskeys, bourbons in particular, are sold on story. So there needs to be some reason to believe, that you're kind of drinking the story along with the liquid. So but how does that play into what you're planning as you're building a brand and its unique flavor?
Absolutely. So, Sweetens Cove out of South Pittsburgh, Tennessee, the golf course has a really interesting story.
Yeah, I've never played that course, but I have seen it, and it looks so out of place.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
Yeah, in a good way. I mean, it's a beautiful course.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just you drive down that little road, and I was like, wow, okay. This is nice.
Yeah. I mean, that's what everybody was saying about it. It's this hidden gem that it had kind of been forgotten about. So the ownership group purchased it, and their story of wanting to preserve it and bring it, kind of back to its former glory felt a little bit like where I'd come from at Castle and Key. I'm so proud and grateful for my time there, but it was time for me to go. I didn't really have a plan of what I was going to do when I left. So when these guys approached me, you know, it was the former CEO that reached out to me and he said, you know, there are these guys that are on our team, Peyton Manning, Andy Roddick, Jim Nance. And he just like kept rambling all these names. And he was like, and you know, we already bought some bourbon. It's 13-year-old bourbon that was made in Tennessee and aged in Kentucky. And I said, repeat that last part. Because, you know, having been with a startup distillery for the past 4 years, the oldest thing that I had tasted that I you know, had the chance to do any sensory on was just a little bit under 2 years old at that point. Right. So I was like, all right, and just, you know, getting my chops around at 13.
It was in Stitzelweller, wasn't it?
I think that's right. Yeah.
I knew about that liquid.
Yeah, and it turned out to be really good.
We're not going to discuss who the distiller was, but there were rules in Tennessee that if you distilled it in Tennessee, you couldn't age it in Kentucky. It couldn't leave the county it was distilled in. And I think there was some obscure, those laws don't exist anymore. We went back and corrected them, but laws that were written back in like 1937 and 38.
Oh my goodness.
That when the 3 counties that declare themselves wanting to distill after Prohibition, it was like, okay, but you own it. If you distill it, you got to store it. You can't let it go to another county. It can't go anywhere else. You got to keep it right there. And of course, Jack Daniel's always had, but other distillers, if they were part of a larger conglomerate, it's like, well, if we're going to put up more barrels, we either have to build warehouses here, but we've got some space available elsewhere. So they moved them off property, and they didn't realize that there was a statute, very obscure statute, that made that illegal.
Well, they eventually made it back to Tennessee.
They resolved it. They resolved it as they should have. So, but it was interesting.
Yeah. So I took those 100 barrels. They didn't really give me any guardrails as far as what they were looking for profile. They just said, you know, we feel like this is good. Yeah, we feel like this is good, but it can't just be good. It needs to be good, like you said. You know,
yeah, because it was what $250, and you can get a price like that, but it can't disappoint.
Oh yeah, if the 200 was our on the shelf price. Yeah. So I took those first 100 barrels and made 5 batches. And then we released 4 single barrels. They called the foursome, you know, the golf term. Yep. And it did really well. And it was a weird time because that was right at the beginning of COVID when we were planning to first launch. Yeah. And then had to, you know, do all the Zoom tastings and get all of these, you know, liquor stores on board because bars weren't doing so much. And it, you know, even through those challenges turned out to be very successful. And I think that the team really putting it in my hands allowed me to have that creativity and freedom to make something really cool. Yeah. Andy Roddick has put it in this way, and I like telling this to people because I think it says so much about the level that they have achieved in their careers. So Andy would say, like, you know, I wouldn't ask Marianne how to swing a tennis racket. So why would I expect Marianne to ask me how to blend a bourbon? So you know, just having that confidence in me, but also the acknowledgement, I guess, just felt really good to be a part of that team.
Yeah. And of course, I've never done it for someone else, but you always felt like, you know, I can't tell you how many customers I sat in front of, you know, just doing single barrels and things of that nature. I clearly have my preference, but that's all it is. It's my preference. And I would taste across the range, and I would never try to put anything disappointing on the table, but I would have barrels that just because of my own, you know, likes and dislikes, I would, you know, like one maybe more than the other ones, but try to never steer anybody, you know, just let them, you know, if you, you know, don't ask me which one I like. You're here to find what you like. And if you leave with the one you like the best, that's what you're here to do. So, you know, I'm not really going to tell, I'm going to describe them to you. I'm going to give you pros and cons about them, you know, from either drinkability or mixability standpoint. But the decision is 100% yours. You know, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder there. So if you tell me, even if I prefer one the most, but you tell me 3's better, you're right. You know, grab 3 and it's your baby. Yeah. And it's a good barrel, and here's why. Yeah. You know, even it's not the one I'm going to personally select for myself.
Yeah, I had some interesting experiences. You know, I was involved with the Woodford private selection, and in the early days when they were doing single barrels with the double oaked, and then I also with Chris started the Old Forester single barrel program, and I had some, you know, interesting experiences with some of the groups that came in. Yep. But there's one that always sticks out in my mind because, you know, I am there as an expert on the product to help guide through the flavor profiles and what they might be finding. And some groups would say, we kind of want to write our notes blind and then we'll talk about it after. But the guy that was there in charge of the group just basically asked me to step out of the room.
Yeah.
He was like, shh, we don't want your input. We got this. I was like, okay, cool. I'll go take a break.
So, you mentioned Old Forester and stuff like that. So just a little one-off question here. You go into a bar, they don't have Forbidden, they don't have Sweetens Cove, they don't have anything that you would normally maybe call, but you see Woodford and you see Old Forester. Which one you call it?
Between the two?
Yeah,
I guess I think it depends on what I'm drinking. If I'm going to drink it neat, it would probably be Woodford, especially if they've got, I love the rye and I love the double oaked a lot. Because I was actually started at Brown-Forman the same year that they started the development of the double oaked. So I was there for the whole time that was happening. I got to be involved in a little bit of that experimentation. So it's a little nostalgic for me too.
I had a chance to go to Hong Kong, the big trade show there for Brown-Forman years ago. And that was right when double oak had come out. I had not seen it on the shelves yet, but it was being introduced then. And I think when I heard the name double oaked, I was like, I'm probably not going to like it. I don't like something that finishes too hard or heavy.
Yeah.
And then I got a chance to taste it there and I'm like, oh, son of a gun. That is so much better than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, it's sweet.
It is. Yeah, that's that second barrel, the high toast is magic on it. That we actually took that because once I had that barrel, it became the inspiration behind what we did with the Heritage barrel at Jack Daniel's. We dropped the entry proof. We went to that high toast, lower char, 100 proof entry. We were able to run it up to about 107 proof and then cut it back to 100. But, number 3 whiskey on the planet that year that we released it. Jack Daniel's had not been on a list like that in a very long time. So that made me feel really good. But it was the power of that barrel was so good. But yeah, I always thought that I've told people that I think the regular Woodford product is excellent as well. I follow a similar model of taking column and pot distillate and trying to control mouthfeel as part of the experience, the same way they do. But as a traditional bourbon person, I really like Old Forester as well. To me, it was one of the hidden gems on the shelf because it had kind of almost disappeared in a way. I'm glad that the family felt, passionate about saving it and all the stuff that's been done since the opening of the distillery downtown and then adding all the new expressions into it. I got a chance to try all of those that were like the different dates. I forget all the 1870 and the 1910 and all those different, all those different ones, the different proof points and stuff like that. But I thought they were all really well done. But I'm a fan of a lot of the brands that came from Brown-Forman as well.
So in the Whiskey Row series, I was working with, what was her name? The brand manager at the time, brand director at the time. I can't remember, but I was tasked. Chris gave me the responsibility of doing the blend, the recipe for the 1870.
Okay.
And so that was to model how they started as a non-distillery producer from multiple
First
different
bottle
locations.
Bourbon.
Yes. So we picked from different warehouses at different entry points, and I came up with this blend. And nobody instructed me this is how you blend bourbon. I just I knew the concept. And so I went out into the warehouse and I grabbed some barrels and I put what I thought was great together and I presented it to the brand director, and I'm kicking myself that I can't remember her name because we had such a good relationship. But she tasted it and she said, Marianne, I don't think we can release this. And I'm kind of dropped my head a little bit. And she's like, it's better than the birthday bourbon. So we're
going to go kick ourselves in the knee there. You can't do that.
So I was really pleased. And, I left Brown-Forman not too long after that product came out and then got into the world in a different way. But yeah.
I can remember Paul Varga, right before the Heritage barrel came out, those barrels were actually part of that 150th anniversary decanter that John Hayes has just said, hey, do something good. I need 100,000 liters, bottles of it that would be ready in the, for 2016, 150th year for Jack Daniel's. And I was eating at the Bourbon Street Cafe up in Louisville, and Paul Varga came by and he said, I got a chance to try that product. And he said, that may be one of the best Jack Daniel's I've ever had before. What did you do different on it? What would it take to make all Jack Daniel's like that? I'm like, you don't want to know what it would mean. I mean, it was 100 proof entry. If you go from 125 to 100 at Jack Daniel's, you're going to build 25 more warehouses. You're going to go from 2.5 million barrels to 3 million barrels to sustain that one change.
Absolutely.
So I do think it's a better product, but it needs to be so much better that you're willing to bite that off so that, the scale of introducing a change like that. I'm like, I told him, I said, it's the Jack Daniels that you would make if cost didn't matter at all. And if everybody was discerning and everybody noticed the difference and would pay for the quality that came from that, that's the way you would make them all. But I'm not sure that that's a viable option
Totally.
for us at this point.
Totally.
So we talked a little bit about Sweetens Cove and kind of how that process of development went. What about Forbidden, where it's your baby? So tell me about it.
For Forbidden, so all of my business partners in Forbidden are from South Carolina.
Okay.
And when they reached out to me initially, I think it was through Facebook. They had read about me in a magazine, and they were like, we want to start this kind of new bourbon profile that honors Southern culinary tradition, specifically white corn that we eat a lot in South Carolina in the summer.
Yep.
We love the idea of it being, developed by a woman so that it's, appealing to all. And, is this something that you might be interested in? And that was in the moment, like maybe a month after I had moved on from Brown-Forman and hadn't really publicly announced that I was at Castle and Key yet. So I was like, I'll have to introduce you to my business partners in Castle and Key and figure out how we want to do this, because I don't even think at that point that the owners of Castle and Key had decided that they would be doing contract production.
Okay.
So these South Carolina guys came in and they found out that they had some commonalities. You know how business really works. You got buddies, then your friend if any friend of so and so is a friend of mine, kind of thing.
Oh yeah. Well, and this industry seems so large because there's so many bottles and brands, but the longer you're in it, the smaller it gets.
100%,
it really does.
yeah.
Yeah. It's a pretty intimate group. You tend to know one another, at least through reputation, if you haven't met yet. So
for sure.
Yeah.
So I was an owner in Castle and Key at the time also. So we decided as a group, we're like, this seems like a good thing. They'll be the first contract customer. So I developed the recipe for that. It was different than any of the recipes that I created for Castle and Key. White corn, white wheat, and a higher percentage of barley. Okay. And that was, intentional to highlight that barley is a little undervalued in American whiskey. And then
version. Thins it out.
And then the difference,
viscosity breaker.
Right. And then the difference in white corn versus yellow corn and white wheat versus red wheat make a dramatic impact on the texture and the flavor profile, that how soft and creamy and buttery it is. So just, anything that Paula Deen would put in her food, cream, butter, like that's what we're looking for in this bourbon.
Rich.
Yes.
Silky, luxurious on the palate. All those good things. So I know you were a certified spirit specialist. You had spent quite a bit of time in R&D, working in the sensory fields and stuff like that. And you've been noted for having a really exceptional sensory skill set. How would you, what would you do to train people to help them refine their skill set? What advice would you give someone who's wanting to become better and to be more discerning as they taste through liquids? What would you tell them?
I think the first thing is that you have to be always thinking about flavor.
Yeah.
So any experience that you have, you're out in a garden, you're in the grocery store, you're having a meal, you're having a drink, like you're conscious of how it feels and what it smells like. Because when you get a glass of bourbon and you're sitting with it and you don't have the visual cues of apricot versus peach versus, lemon versus orange versus tangerine, or, all these things, it becomes much more difficult to put words to those characteristics. Yep. And you don't even have to start that specific either. Yep. Just knowing the difference between what a fruity and a floral note are, between a spice note and a sweet aromatic, and what does a barrel smell like? What does a barrel taste like? What is it possible that it can contribute? And then, all going down the rabbit hole of all the technical processes and the actual chemical compounds and how they express and, what's possible by what you see as the process. So I created this blind bourbon tasting thing called Eaves Blind. Yep. And that's
taking the visual out of the sensory experience.
And what they say, you take one of your senses away and it amplifies everything else. Yep. So I presented it with black Glencairns. They were in black glass, so you couldn't see the color of the liquid at any point. You were unaware of the source. So not knowing any of that, but trying to unlock, because everybody can taste. whether you can get to a sommelier level, that takes a lot of effort.
Yeah.
Whether you even want to, but if you just want to have fun with it, you just have to practice also, and in a thoughtful way.
Yeah. Of course, I was responsible to help train the 100 official whiskey tasters at Jack Daniel's as well. Good form. I would always tell them, it's like, if you have your mouth closed and you're nosing the first sample, don't open it on the second sample. Keep it closed throughout, keep it open throughout, but you're introducing a variable that's not related to the sample. And you just need to understand that these things you're doing make a difference.
100%.
And then when it came to tasting, my approach to the tasting thing was a little bit different than Chris Morris, because, you often hear them saying that Woodford has 200 different discernible flavors in it, which I think feels very intimidating for for someone. I would tell people, I'm not going to get overly descriptive of the flavors. You decide what you liken it to based on what's in your diet and your understanding of flavors. But sweets on the tip of the tongue, sours on the sides and underneath, bitters on the back of the tongue and throat. So think about where you're tasting it as much as what you're tasting. If it's very forward in the mouth, those are sweet flavors. That's where they show up. If it's in the back of the throat, those are bitter flavors. So it's like milk chocolate or dark chocolate. It's all chocolate, but those will have different points of where they tend to concentrate their flavors. So just if you're paying attention to that, Gentleman Jack, tip of tongue, Old Number 7, more centered, single barrel, fuller mouthfeel, more umami, savory, and things of that nature. It could be a little bit of everywhere, but it makes a bigger statement. So just that was sort of the change I was trying to introduce, was just having a little bit of discipline, because they all knew what Jack Daniel's tasted like or what it should taste like, but it was those little minor differences. It's like not just what you're tasting, but where is it on the palate. And if you'll start paying attention to that, you become a better taster.
Yeah. It was really interesting the way that I was trained at Brown-Forman in sensory, because the base test that they do to allow you to get onto these kind of consumer replicating panels is the 4 primary tastes. Like, is it sweet? Is it salty? Is it bitter? Is it sour?
Shouldn't be salty, you hope.
Yeah. But just be able to discern the difference between those.
Yeah,
so they present those 4 in water, and then they present those 4 in vodka, and how often folks would flip things around when it got into alcohol was really interesting to me.
Yeah, one of the brand fairs that Brown-Forman came down and did for the Jack Daniel's employees, I can remember I walked in, and this was when Archer was out there, so it had like that green apple, flavored, and I didn't realize what they were going to be doing in there, so I just kind of came in and started walking around, but sampling some of the products that we didn't make and I hadn't tried yet. But they had a sorting exercise there, and it was all the whiskeys of Brown-Forman.
Oh, cool.
Presented to us blind, and so you didn't know which one was which. They were like little small sample cups, but you had to taste it, then you had to put them on the mat where, which is Jack Daniel's, which is Old Forester, which is Canadian Mist, which is Early Times, which is Woodford. So you kind of were moving them around, and I still had this green apple thing in my mouth. I was really struggling to get out, and I was like, here, Jeff, see if you can do it. And I was like, no pressure here.
Right.
I was able to do it, but I would say it was harder than I would have imagined. At the same time, I think Tommy Cobble, I don't know if you knew Tommy, he ran bottling. He was a multi-generation employee in Lynchburg. If you've ever seen the Gentleman Jack bottle that has the image of the 2 guys looking into the mellowing vat, that was Jeff Norman and Tommy Cobble. Both, their dads worked there together. They worked there together. So, but yeah, Tommy was able to do it as well. But most people failed terribly. It just, they thought they knew the brands better than they did. But it was a challenge. Even for somebody who, I prided myself in at least knowing Jack Daniel's. If I get that one wrong, you're going to shoot me, right? If I don't know that one. But what would you say? I know bourbon is a very traditional product, but how would you say you try to balance the tradition of bourbon with trying to be innovative and create new things at the same time, be respectful to tradition?
Yeah, I think that there's this importance in the tradition with respect to quality. And I think that as long as we're respecting the history and what everything that's led up to where we are today, I still do think that there's so much more innovation ahead for us. But I just have to say it that I think that this forced aging stuff is really taking us backwards. It's a negative to the innovation and the art and all of the history that's gotten us to this point where people are really starting to love bourbon.
Yeah.
where it had been seen as this bottom shelf product globally for such a long time, for us to start, force aging stuff. I think that maybe there's a place for it in like barbecue sauce, but to put it in a bottle and try and trick somebody that in 5 minutes I made a 20-year-old bourbon, it just annoys me more than anything, I guess.
You might have the color of one, but you won't have the character of one. There's just things that can't be rushed. I've seen that too. I've had people tell me I put everything in small barrels so it matures faster, and I'm like, not really. It matures differently. It matures differently, and I'm not saying it's going to be a bad product, but it's not equivalent. The same color that would come from a 5-gallon barrel, 10-gallon barrel versus a 53. I'm a big believer in the 53s, and to just be patient to let that run its course, let Mother Nature. Hopefully, you're in a 4 seasons climate. That's one of the things that Kentucky and Tennessee are both blessed with. Limestone water, 4 seasons climate, getting those winter summer cycles that just naturally let the whiskey flow in and out, the oxidation, the extraction of flavors. To me, there's something kind of cool about it, and you can't rush it. And I'm not saying that the oldest liquids are going to be the best, but there is a certain amount of maturation that you really can't skip.
I agree.
I think there's a certain number of years, because I've even tried scotches, and scotch is clearly defined on its age, where I've had basically something that was a 12-year-old expression, compared it to an 18 from the same brand. I'm like, the 12 is the sweet spot. It's better than the 18. It's better. The 12 is better than the 8, and it's better than the 18. So that's the peak, at least to me.
Yeah.
So you've had a lot of things happen in your career, a lot of awards come your way. What is the thing that has happened to this point that you would say you're the achievement that you're most proud of?
That's a great question. I think I'm really proud, and this is maybe not an award, but having the opportunity to start the Eaves Foundation.
Okay.
So it happened around the time where the Forbidden brand got a spot on the Today Show, and I was like, now seems like the perfect time to really talk about walk the walk more than just talk the talk. Yeah. Like I made this step in the industry, and that's the perfect opportunity to reach a hand back and start continue.
And I'm not familiar with it, so tell everybody a little bit about it, and certainly we'll try to get people to find you and support you there.
Thank you. Yeah, so the Eaves Foundation is based on education and mentorship, and we'll be producing scholarships as soon as I have the endowment funded. But it's to support under represented communities in all beverage, focusing on spirits, but also
encouraging people.
Yes. Yes.
In this direction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think that, the future ahead of us has a lot of innovation and diversity, and in order to discover what's possible, we also have to, find diversity in the people that make it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can kind of see on the screen out here, we've gone to red, which means I'm supposed to start wrapping this up. But there's one final question that we like to ask all of our guests, and that is, what is your favorite way to gather around? That's one of the essences of our brand. We want to make spirits that are worth sharing, that are worth gathering around, that if you want to serve somebody something that you feel is nice, that we're a brand that you believe in to do that. But what is your favorite way to gather around with friends and family? What does your perfect gathering or perfect evening look like? Who's there and how does it go?
I think there have been many occasions in my life where I would have thought, this is the most perfect night. I wouldn't change a thing. Holidays with family and having the opportunity to open something really special. Those are memories that I'll carry forever. I remember one of the last Christmases that I got to spend with my father. I opened a bottle of pre-Prohibition Old Taylor. And so just seeing his face, it was not bad. It was not like a bad product, but just like having that experience for the first time of tasting something that had been in the bottle, basically preserved for 100 years. It was, priceless.
It was special. Yeah, you're making memories. So we kind of talked a little bit about that. To me, whiskeys, one of the things that's really unique about them in the distilled spirit space is the story. You don't necessarily have to have a story for a vodka. You don't necessarily have to have a story. They don't necessarily want to know where it came from. As long as it tastes good, it's okay. But when it comes to whiskey, it's different. People want to know who, where, tell me about it. And the more history that you have, the better.
Absolutely.
You know, even if it's a short history, you know, it's something that would intrigue people to say, I want to support that brand. I want to follow them and see where they go from here. And I'm certainly hoping that Forbidden becomes that for a lot of people, that they can kind of see it from its inception, and we'll be talking about it, you know, decades from now, that I remember when this brand was born, and it's become one of my favorites.
Well,
so
thank you for saying that.
But good luck to you.
Thank you.
So I can't thank you enough for making the time to come over to East Tennessee and spend some time with us. For everybody that's listening today, the East Foundation, please look into it. If you can support that would be fantastic. But just for everybody who's tuned in today, I appreciate the time that you spent with us. I hope that you enjoyed today's content. Marianne's always so great to listen to. I heard her speak at Bourbon and Beyond a few years ago after she had left Brown-Forman. And I had a pretty high expectation of today, and it certainly did not disappoint me. Thank you for being here. Thanks to everybody for listening. Distilling Greatness. Please continue to follow us. We'll try to do, I know we've skipped a few months, but we're going to start doing these monthly, and please be looking for new episodes each month for the rest of this year. But thank y'all for tuning in.